exploded, and Roxy could smell grapefruit as she turned around and saw the other cop and Amelia in a battle to the death. Amelia didn't look so good, so when Amelia and the cop fell behind the far side of the cruiser, Roxy made a run for it. The next thing Roxy knew, she was lying in an alley looking up at the sky, completely frozen, just like before. Amelia was holding a pendant that was hanging from her neck that she had taken from the cruiser, and she took a small stone from it and placed it upon Roxy's forehead, not to transfer her consciousness into Roxy, and Roxy's into hers, but simply to probe Roxy's mind for some answers. Roxy tried not to think about the grave or the name upon the grave, but the more she tried not to, the harder, the more she did so. Then Roxy heard almost a command in her mind, "Sleep." While Roxy slept, a woman came out from one of the stores that had a back door to the alley, and she threw her trash into the dumpster. She noticed Roxy's hand sticking out from the cardboard. She pulled the cardboard pieces off of Roxy, expecting to find a dead body, but she could see she was still breathing, so she sat her up as the stone on Roxy's forehead fell to the ground. Roxy slowly started to wake up, still groggy and all, but she thought she had been talking to a woman, but looking around she couldn't see anyone. She could see that she was still in the alley and half covered by pieces of cardboard and with a splitting headache, but it was all so confusing. Then the woman returned with a co-worker. "I'm fine," said Roxy. She tried to assure them, but they insisted that she come into their restaurant for a bowl of soup. She complied, but the first time their attention went elsewhere, she bolted out the door and was gone. When Roxy got home, she intended to tell her father everything and warn him of the danger, but when she saw her dad, she was struck by the same feeling, a sixth sense of danger, and as she watched her father, she noticed that he moved different. So she just went to bed. Later her father called her down for dinner, but she said she wasn't hungry. That night she crawled out of the bed and returned to the cemetery. She dug and dug at Carlo Callida's grave, but the crown was gone. So Roxy finally gave up and walked away in a circle. And as she crouched in the circle, in the shadows, observing the grave, she saw her father there, and he was running a blue light over the grave. And then after picking up a cyber scent, walking away with the device in his hand, leading the way. Roxy returned to the alley and found several stones, any one of which could have been the stone that Amelia had placed upon her forehead. So she collected them all. She never shared the story about the stones with anyone, but everything else about what had happened to her, she wrote down and published it in her high school newspaper, the Screaming Eagle. Because of that article and its link to an actual murder or two, the police interviewed Roxy in depth, and they finally let her go, and they promised to do everything in their power to find her father, but she knew they never would. At home, looking at the stones, Roxy thought to herself, "I don't know how, but somehow I'm going to get to the bottom of this, or else my name isn't Roxy Rose Bustan." Years later, Roxy had become a successful owner of scientist and owner of her own lab, and she took each one of these stones that she had collected that day in the alley and made each one into a necklace that she placed around the neck of a mouse. One day she got a strange vibe from one of the mice. She knew it was looking at her. She had this sense that something wasn't right, and so she quietly pressed the button under her desk and filled the mouse cages with knockout gas. So now she knew which one was the stone. While the mouse slept, the mechanical arm removed the stone from around, snipped the necklace and removed the stone from around the cat and dropped it out, removed it from the cage. And when the mouse awoke, it was angry, frightened, and confused. Roxy held up a picture of her nanny and said to the mouse, "Are you Amelia?" And the mouse wrestled. Then she said, Are you looking for Amelia?" Again the mouse wrestled. This isn't getting me anywhere. But Roxy had a matrix chip in a tiny mouse hat. That she had dropped into. She had the mechanical arm drop it into the cage. "Put this on. It will allow us to meet in a computer-generated virtual reality matrix, where hopefully we can talk." The mouse struggled to put on the hat. It rested its head up against the wall to put pressure on the chip as Roxy put on a pair of virtual reality glasses. Roxy saw a plant that turned its head towards her and talked. "Please, Roxy, I only want to live," said the plant. "How did you jump into the mouse?" "I was transferring my consciousness into a host when I was hit by a disruptor blast. They will think I'm dead. They will have the royal crown and the 12 stones, which is all they were really after anyways, and I will be free. Roxy, I'll no longer be pursued." Roxy saw the grave of Carlo Collida, and then the giant oak tree behind it in the virtual reality matrix. And she knew that Amelia had buried the other piece of the tracker's transfer device at the base of the oak. The mouse panicked and wiggled out of the hat and spent 5 minutes scratching at the cage. "Oh no," said Roxy, "you are not going anywhere. Ever again. I will feed you and care for you, but when you burn through this host, you are done." Roxy knew that the cage was state-of-the-art, and Amelia would never be able to scratch her way free. And sure enough, one morning there was the smell of grapefruit, and the mouse had passed away. Amelia treated the entire cage as a biohazard, and it was placed into a burn bag and incinerated. Roxy went to the big oak tree and retrieved the other piece of transfer unit. Roxy could not trust her team or anyone else with knowledge of this technology. Such knowledge could not be shared. So she worked alone in her own lab, cut off from her staff. And all of her discoveries she shared with the world through 1 trillion skips in the internet in order to mask their point of origin. Free of charge to open source and all that. And her lab always seemed to be the first lab to bring products based upon this new technology to market. They denied any pre-knowledge, of course, but many people had their suspicions. Then, when she was nearly 80 and she had spent her 70s staring death in the face, she decided that the world was not yet ready for such knowledge. So she had both pieces of the transfer unit placed into a time capsule and put into the cornerstone cement block for the Center of Science and Discovery that she was sponsoring with her wealth in Tehran, Iran, the birthplace of her parents. This was going to be a mighty center of scientific discovery and development, and was dedicated to human, not national, advancement. And when she exhaled for the last time at the age of 84, she passed on with a smile.